Hello everyone, Brad does it all here. I wanted to do a video today about sanding wooden bowls on the lathe. I'm not a great turner, so I've had to become a pretty good sander. So I wanted to go through my method of sanding bowls with you. First off is I use a right angle drill. This one comes from Cleanspore. These are really great. The sandpaper I use also comes from Cleanspore. It's these wavy or scallop sanding pads. And then I use the scallop backup pad. Fortunately, these aren't carried by Cleanspore, so I get these from Craft Supplies. And I use the soft version. And also from Craft Supplies is this backing pad. When you put this all together, you get this set up. And I have one of these for each grit, all the way from 120 up to 600. And also from Craft Supplies, you'll notice on a drill, they have this quick release. And so you make sure you buy the backup pads that have the quick release connection. And so with these, you just push this forward, pop it in, and you're ready to go. So these make it easy to change as you go through the grits. You don't have to fool around pulling off the sandpaper and putting it back on. Another thing which I really like to use is the sandpaper cleaning stick. It's really great to get all the residue out of the sandpaper. It really makes a difference. Sandpaper lasts much longer to clean it. And I'll go over this a little bit more in the video, but I'm really a big fan of this Yorkshire Grit, which you can get from the walnut log. And this makes just a super fine finish. And I'll talk about this more in the video when we use it. And last off, when I first started into woodworking years ago, I was really bad about wearing breathing protection. And with sanding bowls, it's a must. I mean, you're right over top of the lathe sanding, so got to use a good face mask. Anyway, we'll go ahead and get started.
All right, we're ready to start here. I've got my lathe set to reverse, which I always like to do when I'm sanding. And I'm turning the speed up until it just starts to spin. In my case, that's about 125 RPM. Anywhere between 75 and 150 RPM is good. You really don't want to go any faster than that. And I've got the drill pulled back about halfway, maybe a little past halfway. And I'm just going all over the bowl. And as you can see in the video, I think it picks it up, you can see the lines, and those normally represent the tooling marks. And I'm trying to watch those lines and get those to disappear as I'm sanding. And just continuing on here, trying to get all those marks out. And the first grit is always the longest sanding because I'm using that very initial grit to get all those sanding marks and tool marks out. Now here I've went ahead and stopped it because at this point I've got it looking pretty good, but at this point you can't really get all those marks out with it spinning. So this will show up and you can see the marks much better with it stopped. And that way you can go in there and work and just spin it by hand and try to blend in all those areas that need it. And I'll just continue around and try to make sure that I don't see anything that looks too bad that I won't be able to clean up with the next grit. So now that's looking pretty good. So feels pretty good right at this point. I think I've got all those initial places sanded out. So I'm going to go ahead and switch over to the next grit, which in this case is 150 grit. Again, I love these quick releases. It makes it a quick switch out. So I'm going to go ahead and let this 150 grit run at real time. I'm not going to cut out any parts. I know it'll be a little boring, but don't fall asleep on me. I know a lot of people want to see just kind of how long I spend. And each grit gets faster, so you're just trying to get those sanding marks at this point from the last grit taken out. And don't skip a grit. I mean, I went 120, 150, 180, 220, 320, 400. I stopped at 400. A lot of times I stop at 320 when I'm using a Yorkshire Grit. If I'm not using Yorkshire Grit for some reason, I'll go ahead and go up and do my final sanding at 600 grit. And the old adage is true, use sandpaper like you're not buying it. So when it starts to get dull, change it out. In this case, it started getting a little dull to me, so I'm changing it out. If you notice, I'm blowing off the Velcro with my air compressor, and that dust will collect in those tips and won't let the sandpaper stick as well. And you'll end up tearing it if you don't clean those out. So always clean those out about every time. And so I'm going ahead and sanding here, and you can notice, you see that dust blow off right at that point. That's a good indication that the sandpaper's working well. Okay, now moving on, I've moved up to the 180 grit. You've noticed I've turned the tenon off. And I like to leave the tenon on when I usually do my first two grits because I'm probably putting some extra force. I like that tailstock support. And after that, those first two grits, I'll go ahead and cut the tenon off. And that way I can blend the bottom in. And as you see here, I'm cleaning my sandpaper with my cleaning stick. And this probably gets the sandpaper to last probably twice as long as it normally would. You can see how clean it came out after that. So now I've went ahead and I've switched up to another grit. I'm still going to work that in and keep on going. All right, now I've gotten everything sanded pretty good the way I like it. So I've got this mounted in my air chuck. So now we'll go ahead and do the Yorkshire Grit. And what I do is I get a paper towel. I fold it probably about 4 times. This is actually a half a sheet, the selected size, but I just get some of this Yorkshire Grit and I just cover it completely. And I like to use a pretty small square just because otherwise you spread it out too much and you're just kind of wasting the material because it starts absorbing into the paper towel and a lot more surface area than you need, and you're just losing it inside the paper towel. All right, so that's pretty good. And I'll just go ahead and I've got my readout off right now, but I usually crank it up maybe about 500-600 RPM. And I just use the same spot that I was using to rub it on. And I'm just going there. And always be sure, watch your fingernails. I don't know how many times I've dug my fingernail in there and made a scratch on my bowl. I gotta go a little light pressure here, but since I'm on this air chuck, I don't want to knock it off center. All right, then I'll go to a new clean spot and repeat. And I think they say this is like an equivalent of almost like 1,000 grit sanding with this standard Yorkshire Grit. I'm gonna go to a new spot again. All right. Then I like to actually go a second time, and this time it doesn't take a lot of the material since you've kind of got a little bit of a coating. This is like a beeswax based material. So that's about all I'll put on there, just a little bit, and I'll just kind of repeat the process again. I just kind of go to where just about don't get anything to come off. That's pretty good. All right, now I'll just toss that paper towel and I'll get me a new one here, and we're going to do the Microfine abrasive grit. Now this, you'll probably use 3 cans of the regular Yorkshire Grit to 1 can of the fine, because it just doesn't take very much at all of this to do. It spreads out a little bit more, and you've already gotten that coat from the standard Yorkshire Grit, so it doesn't really soak in. So that's about all you need. And so I'll do the same thing. I'll start out with the same place that I rubbed it on with, and I've got my lathe running in reverse, which is what I do when I'm sanding. Okay, I think that's probably pretty good. So there you can see, there's your final finish. We'll pop this off.
Just one final note on the Yorkshire Grit. Of course, this is a beeswax product, so it does leave the beeswax kind of finish in your bowl, which, I mean, it's a decent finish on its own. I mean, you can go over that with some, if you have a buffing pad, you can do like a carnauba wax over that. But if you're going to use other finishes, I suggest, experimenting a little bit. But what I do, if I want to put like a polyurethane finish or even a shellac or lacquer finish, I'll take a paint thinner on a rag and just wipe it down, and then I'll go back with some denatured alcohol and wipe it again, and that pretty much will take the majority of all that beeswax off of there. Anyway, I really appreciate everyone watching, and please subscribe and give me a thumbs up. Thanks.